we speak about magnetism, but what is it? I think, we need to understand that if we get it right, if the brand and the audience stick with one another, that it can be a pretty fruitful relationship. And there's, speak about loyalty and relevance. Perhaps get that compelling or lack of compelling instance wrong, and it might be harder to kind of bring together. So there's things to consider. There's identity, there's service, there's value, which I think packaged all together speaks about experience. That experience needs to move far past marketing and needs to start a lot sooner. Needs to start with the brand, needs to start with the developer, and ultimately understanding the audience. So I think it would be really interesting to kind of dive straight in and ask, actually, what does magnetism stand for in branded residences? And I think if we kick that off with you, Lindsay, to understand kind of successful partnerships between brand and developer, like what does the brand look for?
Well, look, I think the most successful projects I've been a part of are really when the brand is brought in early. I think we heard that earlier today. I think James alluded to that as well. I think that successful partnership it's really important that there's an alignment in the vision for the project. It's an opportunity for brands and developers to co-create something. And I think that really lends itself to the most successful projects. Make sure the developer really understands the role that the brand plays, what they do, what they don't do. Jeff outlined some of that in his keynote earlier, introducing as well. And just making sure that the developer really has not just the passion, the wherewithal, the chops, really, to deliver on the brand promise. It's not a slam dunk every single time. And so making sure that there's alignment there is really, really massively important. And I think with Accor too, I joined Accor 6 months ago, and it's a different realm from the single brands, luxury brands I was working on before, but picking the right brand, getting the right brand. Accor has 26 that offer a residential proposition, and picking the right one is massively important. Yeah. And also, don't forget the buyer. Right? We talk about the developer, we talk about the brand, but always having that buyer-centric mindset is massively important as well.
Absolutely, and it's that kind of trilogy, isn't it, that we so work together. And I know that co-creation is super important and a kind of a pertinent piece for yourself, Jenny, and perhaps we'll touch on that in a little bit. But Kunjip, from a developer's perspective, and I guess with that sort of regional focus on East Asia as we are in Bangkok, how important is brand selection when looked through the lens of the developer?
I would say it's one of the most important decisions we make when we develop a project, if not the most important decision we make. And I think, the brand we picked will create, obviously, magnetism and the pull to the buyers. And at the same time, it creates the expectation, right? And I think expectation can be good and bad. If as a developer we can meet that expectation and go beyond it, that's when we create value for the customers, right? And I think the pitfall for branded resident is when you pick the brand and you do not live up to the expectation of the buyers, right? And that's when everybody loses, right? The brand loses, and the buyer loses, and the developer loses. So, going back to answer your question, the most important decision we make in developing a project, and I think the big consideration when you choose the brand for the project is to really think about whether you can meet that expectation of the buyer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And perhaps if we just kind of expand on that a little bit, with audience and buyer expectation in Thailand and the sort of wider Asia area, like, why do you think that there is so much appetite in Thailand, Bangkok, Phuket, other regions currently?
Well, I don't have any data to back this up, but I see Bangkok and Phuket as world cities, similar to Dubai, right? These are the cities and destinations where people are familiar with. They see themselves spending a lot of time in. It's quite convenient to visit, quite convenient to live in. There are not that many world cities in the world. And I think Bangkok and Phuket, and just lucky for Thailand that we have 2 of such city in one country.
Yeah.
And I think when you have a world cities, you attract the world citizens, right? And when you attract the world citizens, they demand a higher level of, standard of living. They demand a higher level of, lifestyle. And I think that's where branded restaurants come in and help set that bar and set that expectation. So, and that's why I feel there's a big demand for such project, both in Bangkok and also in Phuket.
Yeah, yeah. Jenny,
Yeah.
you advise a good few brands, organizations, individuals, with your, with your knowledge and your experience on their kind of global opportunities. I think that's kind of to Kunjip's point there about kind of global cities. And everything has its nuance, right? Location, culture. Does culture and location really matter?
It really does. And I think the mistake some developers make is that it's assuming that the ultra high net worth audience is just one type of profile of buyer, and it's not. That cultural nuance is so important. So if you take, you're selling identity, you're selling aspiration. So in Thailand, there tends to be a great national pride, but at the same time, there's a global ambition. Yeah. So those buyers are, it's really important that brands respect Thai culture. So that's why you have Mandarin Oriental residences, which I saw recently. They very much celebrate that in their film, the very cinematic film that they did for the launch. It really evokes Thai heritage, the Thai beauty service. They capture all of that in their marketing. And I think they have Jim Thompson silk. Right. In some of the fabrics. So that, it's all those subtle differences, but they just make they're making a statement that we respect Thai culture. Yep. Four Seasons Residences has done a lot about the landscaping to capture that sort of Thai water therapy. So it's really important. Chinese buyers, Indian buyers tend more towards trophy assets. Mm-hmm. So they're looking for brands that really respect generational wealth and that they can trust with generational wealth. And then you have Japanese and Singaporean buyers. I mean, this is a huge generalization, obviously, but Japanese and Singaporean buyers, they have a different view of luxury. It's more about restraint. It's quiet luxury. And they value, privacy and security issues and perfectionism. So you really, at the end of the day, you have to work out who's the buyer, yeah, and why are they buying? Yeah. So if you look at some schemes in Dubai I visited recently, there was the Dorchester, the Lana scheme is the 39 apartments all bought by Russian-speaking buyers to get money out of Russia essentially, and they're not living there. It's an investment. The Dorchester Director of Residences is frantically putting on programming of events, etc., because that's what she's expected to do, but nobody turns up because they're not there. So they're not really buying it for the lifestyle. They're buying it because they trust the brand, and there's a permanence, isn't there, to buying in Dubai, and the Dorchester brand gives them that kind of reassurance. So I think, it's really important that you understand the cultural nuance with each buyer group, and you look at the different type of high net worth buyers and their reasons for buying. Yeah,
and I think certainly the team that we have at Sectorlight, when they step into a new project and they understand kind of the brand that they're going to be working with and the ambition and vision of the developer, they want to understand kind of where the freedom lies in expressing that location and that culture within the brand's own principles. And perhaps, that's something obviously that you've been heavily involved in actually influencing the development of that. And I think it's a really important piece, hospitality brands, or any brand actually, hospitality non-hotel, at some point they never had that in their locker. doing residences, right?
No, and I think that's always something there's got to be room for. I think right now, for example, we're working on some of the guiding principles for the Raffles brand, and sort of we're dissecting sort of the hotel and what lends itself to a residence, but what is unique to residents, but what's that red thread through to the brand, right? Because people are buying the brand because they've experienced the hotel in most instances, not every, but most. So one of those new kind of pillars that we're looking at for Raffles is that local sort of, we call it landmark address is what we're calling it, but it really is that local influence. How does this brand show up in this place? And that's a consideration for everyone. We looked at, we recently we did one of these in Riyadh not so long ago, and we talked about Diriyah Gate and the Raffles there in terms of what they've done to really bring in the local influence and culture and just detailing to make it feel of its location.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Massively
agree. You
important.
can't just parachute a brand into a place
No.
and expect
No.
it to work and put a name above the door and
Yeah, you've
and
got to
they
always
will come. It doesn't
No.
work like that in many locations.
Exactly. And you know, as a developer that has kind of grown up, you know, in their city or in their region, you know, that's really important for you guys to kind of hold on to that and make sure that there's an identity and an authenticity to kind of how you present yourself, right? Because it all kind of comes back to making sure that trilogy works.
Yeah, I think so. Authenticity is very important, I think. And, you know, the right brand for the right location, you know, is understated, right? It's one of the most important thing. And, you know, if you can pick the right brand for the right location, that's half your job done.
Yeah.
Right? And, but you have to be really honest about, you know, the neighborhood you're working with,
Yeah.
the location you're working with, right?
Yeah.
Is it really the right location for the brand you're thinking of?
Yep.
Right? Because if it's not, you know, if we put Raffles in a soy somewhere in Bangkok, that wouldn't work,
Yeah.
right? And I think a good case in point for us would be when we did the standard residences in Phuket, right? And we did it in an area called Bang Thao, which is, you know, we heard the master, KV Ho, this morning. He pioneered that neighborhood with his Laguna project, right? And that neighborhood more or less turned into the lifestyle district of Phuket. And when we acquired the land around there, we asked ourselves, you know, what brand do we really want to see in that neighborhood that would elevate the neighborhood to a whole new level, right? And, you know, we sat around the table, we speak to the operators, and we look at the options available. And in the end, we went with the standard brand because we felt that brand would fit in nicely with the neighborhood that's lifestyle driven and also add a bit more flavor
Yep.
to the neighborhood as well.
Yeah, and I think we'll touch on the standard in particular later on, actually, because I think that's a really, really interesting point. But I guess then, if you know, back to you, Lindsay, I think if location and the identity of the essence of a location and the brand kind of all coming together, if that's a huge pull factor in sort of setting out that wider proposition. Perhaps should we be looking at kind of marketing campaigns for a different lens and sort of viewing that as sort of emotional strategies, you know, reminding ourselves that emotion is, you know, the bigger picture of ambition, price, success, return, etc. Should we be leveraging that as we kind of start to plan out our strategies to market?
Look, I think we already are. I think the basis and the foundation for a successful project is trust, and that is a core inherent emotion, right? Right? Trust in the developer, their track record, trust in the brand, and that experience you've had with the brand. And so I think for the baseline, that's where you need to start. I think everything else you can start to build on from there. So things like someone was touching on the previous panel touched on it earlier, right? All those brand touch points and the experience of the sale, whether that's in the car from the airport, the arrival to the sales gallery, the scent, the way you're greeted, the way the tea is served, or, you know, that brand needs to come to life, not outside of our hotels, right? That needs to come to life throughout the sales experience and the journey. And I think it's actually fundamental that the sales team have experienced the hotel brand, that they have stayed, that they have been a guest. I mean, the buyers know the brand, right? They are going to expect the same level of service and the same experience that they have in our hotels. So I really think investing in making sure that the sales teams can relay the message of the brand, can really transmit what it feels like, because they're at a disadvantage otherwise, because the buyers know.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, really being able to leverage the full power of the brand at every touch point in that sales journey is massive, because our opportunity as the brand starts after they buy, right? When we can recognize them as a resident owner, as a VIP, as, you know, through the Accor network, also through the individual hotels when they choose to stay as a guest, that's when it really gets exciting. That's when we can really curate and personalize the residential experience.
Yeah, but I think to Kunjip's point on, you know, authenticity, it's like, you know, we can be compelling and get people through that door, you know, and we have plenty of mediums to do that, and you know, and support and activations, but, you know, it's a living thing. You know, and it goes beyond a transaction and becomes, you know, part of that individual. So whether that is an investor that may not set foot in it, they might be purchasing for identity, but identity is incredibly powerful, right? Much like if it becomes, you know, a home or a second home, it becomes a lot more personal. And there's a wonderful quote that we'll touch on later from Petit Philippe, that talks a little bit about that. But I guess that kind of brand experience is like complete picture, which perhaps we go back to some of the early points raised, I know by Jeff and James, especially around kind of getting early, you know, start that understanding, like even as
co-creation, really. I
totally.
think that is.
You've got to live with, you know, you've got to move in with one another, right? You've got to
trust one another.
understand how you work, and, you know, what expectation is. It's a genuine relationship, and it's very human. And I think that's kind of that piece on sort of, you know, cognitive understanding, the rational and the emotional. They don't come in equal parts, but they need to be equally considered. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting point that you make there. But perhaps then just, you know, an apt point to talk about the standard then, Kunjip. And, you know, why has it been such a success for you guys?
Well, I think, let me go back to what Kun Lindsay just said, right? I think you touched on the most important point without realizing, and it's one of the most difficult things we developer face when we sell branded residence, which is the buyers, they know the brand, like really, really know the brand, and they know it well, and most of the time they know it better than the salesperson engaging with them. And that sometimes presents a lot of trouble, right? And because that more or less create a mismatch in perceptions and expectations. And I think, you know, for developers and real estate developers in general, they're not used to that, right? They're not used to the buyers knowing more about the product than they do. Seriously, right? But when you sell branded residence, you know, for us, we sell the standard residences in Phuket, and people who walk through that door with that pool, with that magnetism, right? It's because they are fans of the brands. They stay in like standards all over the world. And they have this level of expectation, and when they walk in, they expect the salesperson to, you know, be up to the expectation, which is not easy.
Yeah.
Not easy at all, right? And it's not only the salesperson, right? Salesperson is a big part of it, but, you know, it goes beyond that, and it goes into the show flats, it goes into the communications, and it goes into the, you know, the drinks we serve them, right? I think they expect welcome drinks level, to be served to them. They don't expect, you know, water, right? Nothing wrong with water, but, you know, when they stay at Standard all over the world, that's how they're being treated. So I think when you decided to work with the brand and you have that pull of the brand, you just have to be able to meet that expectation, right? And if we genuinely believe we picked the right brand for the location, we generally believe that we have the right product mix, the right decorations, one that resonates with the brand essence, I think success will come eventually, right? And it's, for us, we have clients who walk through the door who are fans of the Standard. They bought the unit already when they were in their car, right? It's for us to lose that customer if we do not meet that expectation. And I believe, you know, for mega brands like Four Seasons and Aman and you know, those very strong brand with such high equity, you have fans like that. And really, it's for us developers to lose them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, as we start this conversation around localization, you know, you probably then start moving into kind of personalization, right? And that familiarity. And that's why, you know, when you join a members club and they're different clubhouses across the world, like they're the same but different. And I think that that relevance between audience and brand becomes really important, because for a relationship to last, there has to be some, I guess, some permanence to it. There has to be some commitment by both parties that they're going to deliver on their promise. So if it kind of, if that sort of emotional, that emotional pull kind of sets us off on a trajectory, it might pose the question to say, well, actually, like, how long does that attraction need to last? And you might very quickly talk about, well, in perpetuity, like forever, right? But as you say, not always easy to do. And I think just, you know, it'd be great, Jenny, to kind of get your view on that. I know that perhaps with the recent, the project that you had with raffles at OWO, you know, was it a really, you know, was permanence an integral component to how you connected with your audience?
Yes, it was. I mean, Raffles at the OWO, first of all, is a Grade 2 listed building in the middle of London. It was a former government office for war built about 100 years ago. But it was in a place in Whitehall that wasn't traditionally associated with being residential. There is a Corinthia hotel right behind, but it took a long time for the Corinthia to get established. And having another hotel without a brand right next to it, it didn't. We were worried that that placemaking was going to be a tough job without having a brand. So we leaned heavily into the Raffles 140-year heritage. I worked with Jeff Tisdall from Accor and didn't work with Lindsay on this project, but we did with the previous one. But with James Price on that one as well. With Jeff and team, and really leaned into the Raffles heritage and the fact that the old War Office had its own history and legacy, and it, you know, magnetism, we've talked about that word a lot. Magnetism isn't magic, you know, it is made, and it was probably a good year of deciding how we were going to position it. Were we going to talk too much about Churchill and Kissinger and all these amazing statesmen who had offices in the building, but there was a risk that we wouldn't then appeal to a younger generation because we would be sounding a bit like a museum. And that didn't really fit with the Raffles brand, which is moving into appealing to new generations, and you know, so it was trying to get that balance, and that it takes a lot of work, and you have to communicate that through every single touch point, through films, through the assets you're creating, through the marketing suite. We had a kind of private members club as a marketing suite rather than a typical sales suite. It was inviting people into more of a private members club environment and sitting down with them and offering them tea, coffee in the Raffles way. You know, it was very different from a typical marketing suite you might see of the type in Dubai, for example. So that was very important. And you talked about Patek Philippe before, so I'm going to steal that quote.
Okay.
You know, you never actually own a Patek Philippe. You only borrow it.
You're
look
linking
after
onto
it
it
for
for the next generation.
I mean, that's how a lot of Asian buyers particularly look at property. It's they're buying it and it's generational wealth.
Yeah.
So that sense of permanence, is this brand going to be on this building for a long term, for the whole time I'm going to have it and for my grandchildren? That's a really important part of the buying decision. And you know, all the brands, the branded living schemes that are now in Dubai and Miami, they've created that sense of permanence.
Yeah.
Because they're proof of concept. That's why developers everywhere else are now looking at that model thinking, well, why don't we latch onto that as well? And I would like to give a contrary view, if I may. I know you've not asked me a question about this. We had that discussion before about, I know we've got 3 minutes. We had that discussion before about, non-hotel brands.
Yeah.
And what, there was a view that they, do they really make sense? I personally think the buyers of those non-hotel brands, whether it's a Bugatti brand or a Mercedes or Missoni or whatever, they're not expecting a lifestyle as if they were like a hotel-led lifestyle with the same service levels that you would get in a hotel-branded scheme. They're looking for design, they're looking for craftsmanship, they're looking for the architecture of the building, and they're looking for the trophy aspects of that building and the identity that it gives that person. That's what I think. And there are plenty of buildings, particularly in London, that don't have brands and are exceptionally well managed, that do deliver this sort of high levels of service that ultra high net worths expect when they walk in the door. That most of the buildings in London now are unbranded.
Yeah.
So I think there is definitely scope for non-hotel brands in that space. It's just, again, what are the expectations of the buyer and making sure that you meet them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we are nearing our crescendo, and I would very passionately carry on, but might get kicked off the stage, wrapping it all up, magnetism, there's no formula to it. And I think in real estate marketing, and especially when you're dealing with humans, there's no one way about it, much like there's no one way about servicing someone. So again, another debate for another day. But if we leave that, if we kind of leave with a takeaway about, well, how do we give ourselves the best chance of generating compelling magnetism and therefore starting that? Lindsay, to you.
I'm gonna repeat what I think you've already heard from me. It is get the brand in early, pick the right brand, and really make sure that there is that symbiotic relationship between the developer and the brand, because that trust, that foundation, is going to manifest itself in the success of the project and going to ultimately lead to a much more successful project.
Yeah, absolutely. Understand one another so that you can kind of perhaps inject a little bit of your own DNA into that golden thread that hopefully guides you through everything that you do. And then, Jenny, from
I would say, going back to building emotion, use all the marketing materials, the messaging, and build emotion, because that's what pulls people in, and then build legacy, and then build that sort of magnetism, because that's what converts. And all those marketing materials, that's your interface with the customer. So you've got to get those right. Yeah,
absolutely. And then Kunjip, to round us off, we obviously kind of spoke about the sort of localization and how important that is for sort of authenticity.
I think we developers have dreams that we are superhuman, right? That we can come up with a good name of residence where it helps pull the right buyers in and make us sell at 5% premium of the project next door. And, I think branded residence is actually the platform that allows us to do that. But there are trade-offs to be made. And, like all powerful weapons, it must be handled with care.
Yeah.
And,
I love that.
I think that care translates to what, Kun Lindsay and Kun Jenny just said, right? We need to be extra careful on how we craft and we create the right product that delivers to the brand promise. Because after all, we are selling to a group of fans who sometimes might do better than us.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I think that's the key points I want to leave with.
Okay, awesome. Well, I mean, I think, on a similar sort of powerful note as as Sectorlight's proposition is all about powerful partnerships and bringing people in place together, I think, understanding what, location, selection, authenticity and permanence do to kind of bring us all together and set us off on the right path is something that I think we can all kind of learn from. Thank you for your time. As I say, honoured to share the stage with you all. You guys are great in what you do, and can't wait to kind of hear what's coming next in your worlds. So yeah, massive hands to panelists today.